Well, hello everybody and welcome to a GFSI webinar today called The New Pathway for Food Safety Auditor, Introducing a Model for Auditor Qualification. Today we're going to talk about one of GFSI's main projects this year around reviewing how food safety auditors are qualified for GFSI recognized certification programs, but also how we can support this population to grow and develop their competence. I have with me a panel of experts from different point of view, which I'll introduce in a minute. As attendees of these webinars, we would invite you to ask questions to us as we go through the content that we have pulled together for you. You may do so through the chat function, which you will see. For convenience, you are in listen-only mode, so we cannot hear you. But if you send us questions and comments, that it will help us understand if we are today addressing your questions and comments on this project. So today with me, I have Vince Desmond from RICA CQA. Hello, Vince. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you.
Andrew Baines from Exemplar Global. Hello, Andrew. Good night. Very late where you are in the world. Leanne Chabot from SQFI, your GFSI recognized CPOs. Hello, Leanne. Good morning or good afternoon. And Chris Middleton from Bureau Veritas, somebody who works with SQF and many other GFSI recognized certification programs. Hello, Chris. And
hello.
Thank you, all of you, for joining us today. We have very different time zones today on this webinar, but we also have different perspective on the crucial questions of food safety auditors. And we're aiming in the next 20 minutes to illustrate what the GFSI new approach really could look like for each of the parties recognized, represented on this webinar, but also for auditors, most importantly. Just to give you a little bit of context for those who are a little bit new to the work GFSI has been doing around auditors. Over the last 18 months, GFSI has been running a series of transformational projects, all encompassed into under an umbrella terms of the race to the top, to improve and secure to third-party certification by addressing some of the fundamental challenges that our stakeholders reported to us in October 2019. This feels like a long time ago. It was before COVID. And so since then, the GFSI team and our members, we've been working to deliver and implement those projects. One of the projects that we're going to talk about today looks at the profession of food safety auditors, a profession that is absolutely critical to the success of GFSI, certification bodies, certification program owners, and also critical to food businesses who rely on third-party certification to mitigate their risks. Trying to address the challenge of availability of auditors, but also of retaining auditors into the profession, GFSI set out to introduce the concept of professional bodies into our ecosystem. These are organizations who exist in other industry and are here to support professionals in maintaining and developing their competence, giving a better recognition to that profession, but also easing out to the profession, which is one of the main challenges that we face today with food safety auditors. So, doing what GFSI does best, we decided to create a recognition program for professional recognition bodies who will be registering food safety auditors. So to illustrate what a professional body is, does, and what their purpose is, I'm going to hand over to Vince and Andrew, who actually represent such organizations and have experience, therefore, in supporting professionals with their career and development. Vince and Andrew, first of all, what is a professional body? What is your purpose? And how do you support the industry that you work in?
Shall I start, Vince?
Hi, Marie-Claude. Thank you for the opportunity to talk, and hi to everybody around the world who's listening in to us. Exemplar Global, formerly known as RABQSA, is a not-for-profit organisation who've been around about 30 years. Our constitution establishes 3 things for us to do. Firstly, to certify people, primarily auditors and engineers. Secondly, to certify organisations that train those people. And thirdly, to encourage ongoing professional development for those people for whom we serve. We provide not only the opportunity to encourage that ongoing professional development, but I think this is really part of being a profession, is to provide opportunity for people to build the skills through things like events, publications, and some other resources like work style assessment, which is a soft skills assessment, and most recently an audit simulator we brought along. But I think more than this, we provide a community for auditors. We certify about 15,000 people of all types around the world. Of those, about 740 of them are in the SQF program as food safety auditors, and another about 350 in other programs of food safety auditors. So it's quite a significant proportion. And we're firmly of the belief that this is an exciting career for people to choose, and so want to make it accessible and affordable to people to be able to do that and to build the skills throughout a career, whether you're just starting out or whether you're late on in your career and wanting to give something back. So there's many dimensions to being a professional body, and certainly our aspiration here is to be one of your PRBs.
Thank you, Andrew, very much for this first answer. Vince, would you like to add to this? Somehow we can't hear you. We could hear you 5 minutes ago, but we can't hear you now.
No, I'm back. I'm back. Sorry about that. Yes. Hello from the United Kingdom, the Chartered Quality Institute, and the International Register of Certificated Auditors. Good to be with you today. I'm not going to repeat what Andrew talked about in terms of what a professional body is, because we do something very similar to that. We've got 18,000 professionals in about 100 countries and about 70,000 people going through certified training courses a year. But what I wanted to do was just talk about our position in the value chain, if you like, and where we're coming from on this professional question. And 2 things from me. First of all, the macro context for skills in the assurance sector, and secondly, a question about attacking root cause of what seems to be a shared problem in all sectors around the problem of attracting and retaining talent. So firstly, the context. Test, inspection, certification globally is a $250 billion industry. Now, $100 billion of that is performed by third-party service providers, the likes of Bureau Veritas. The other $150 billion is conducted either in-house by firms themselves or through governments and regulators. Now, core to having assurance services globally, whether that's in food safety, aerospace safety, nuclear safety, is having people, either third-party or internal systems management competence and capability. Now, both sides, in our experience, both third-party and industry sides, have identified attracting and developing talent as one of their top 3 strategic issues. In fact, GFSI, I know you've talked about the increasing burden of requirements, the aging population, the perceived unattractiveness of the profession. So as a professional body, I see us sitting and part of that value chain in terms of qualifying people that industry use. But I've got a concern. We often use the word professional in our context, but we don't treat, I believe, we don't treat assessors like professionals. There's a tendency, in my view, to treat them more like products, to be certified and kite marked. And And what I think we're missing potentially is a number of things that we need to consider in the wider value chain to make this an aspirational career choice. 4 points from me on that matter. Is there a marketing issue? Do we sell the sizzle in the sausage? There's a huge societal impact when 1 in 10 people fall ill every year because of unsafe food. What a vocation, what a difference you can make to the world. So I think we need to consider how we market the broad profession, not just the third party side of it. Secondly, the supply chain issue, properly engaging with the supply chain. And by that, I mean universities, food science institutes, which provide the prerequisites of knowledge, but also industry, which provides the practical experience. The third part for me is the compelling career path. At the moment, we talk about progression from trainee to lead auditor, but I think we need to be talking about assurance in a broader career path in this space, and accept and encourage what I call tourists into the assessor community. And there's value in them coming in and going back into industry or other parts of the sector. And finally, about how we treat auditors. Do we really recognise and pay them for their skills of applying detailed and current knowledge? I think that's important to make evidence-based judgments. Or do we treat them like what you might say gas technicians and take them through ticking boxes for schemes that are often very much the same? I think what GFI is doing here has the potential to make the current scheme, if you like, more efficient for scheme owners, auditors, certification bodies by removing duplication of effort. But I think a broader question we're going to need to think about are these other questions of how we position the career, how we think about the value chain, and how we really position this as a profession. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Vince, for that fantastic bigger picture setting, and it's really interesting to hear, numbers around the actual size of the business that we're talking about. And so Andrew and Vince, you made a couple of comments about some of GFSI's ambition, which I wanted to reflect on and back at you in questions. First of all, around attracting and easing out entry to the profession. And so GFSI we've over the years by increasing the stringence of requirements on auditors for any of the GFSI recognized CPOs, we've actually created situations where we're shutting down the doors because we're becoming more and more active and more demanding. And I would like you to explain how the approach that we are suggesting of focusing on validation of competence as opposed to validation of your CV or whatever training you've achieved, people to join the profession from different experience or history in their career. So that's the first thing, because I think this is something that is is second nature to you as professional bodies, but it's not necessarily clear to people who manage auditors the way we've imposed it over the years. And the second question would be for me around the continual professional development and how you support people who are registered with you to have a professional development and actually a career to progress and not just stay an auditor. And you made a comment about giving back, which I think would be interesting to explore. So I'll leave that to you, Vince and Andrew, and then I'll continue with Leanne for some more practical operational question on the ground, if I may.
There was quite a few points there, Marie-Claude. We could probably take the rest of the session trying to answer some of those points. But let me start by talking about perhaps the reality of how people end up being auditors. More than frequently, you find yourself here. You work somewhere else, a laboratory or something, and you go off and do an auditor training course, and you find yourself doing audit, whether it be first, second or third party. But certainly it can be a fantastic career, whatever it is that you're wanting out of a career. This can provide it if you see it as a vocation. But one thing that is for sure over the years, and certainly in my experience the last 30 years has proven this, it never stays the same. We have new standards, we have new technologies coming in, we have things like COVID coming along and remote auditing challenging us. So it never stays the same. And whatever the stage of your career, it's imperative that you're keeping up to date with what's happening. So that continuing professional development appropriate to where you're at in the stage of your career is really important. And to be able to do that, you need the opportunity and the resources to be put in there to support you in doing that. So the organisations that are engaging you, like the certification bodies, the scheme owners, whether you're a contractor yourself, whether you're a first-party auditor, also critically important in the maintenance of systems and standards and so on through the execution internally, need to be conscious of the need to keep these skills. It's not just that one training course, off you go, then you're trained for the next 25 years. All these changes need to be invested in. And through that investment, I think you get the confidence in your abilities through the role, and indeed the pleasure out of the success of the role when you're executing it with some skill. Competence is about the application of knowledge and skills, but frankly it's a very difficult thing to measure. It changes day by day. What an auditor does today in this small operation and in engineering is very different to how they perform tomorrow in a multinational boardroom level in a different standard environment. So how we make sure people are assigned to the right areas where their skill sets are best suited, get the feedback from all of the stakeholders who vary very widely as well, and encourage that ongoing development, I think is really the challenge for us. And it seems to me that's what the intention of what you're trying to do here is. In the food safety world, food safety in itself is not a point of marketing difference. We all assume that the food that we're consuming is going to be safe. We should equally well assume that there's a basic level of competence of those that are out there assessing it. I actually include first and second party as well as third party auditors in that statement. But we have influence over the third party auditors through this scheme. So to be able to agree a level of basic competence, still allowing for the operation of differences between the character and service levels of CVs, for example, is what we're really trying to do here. And that should be a benefit to all the auditors, make this an accessible career option and one that provides some satisfaction as well as producing a good result for all of the stakeholders concerned.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Vince, would you like to complement Andrew's answer?
Yes, thanks very much. So firstly on competence, yeah, we've already moved, especially on our quality professionals, we've moved to a competence model. Now, you know, I think we've been hampered by international standards historically. If you look at 19,011, for example, in the old days, that was about counting numbers. That was about counting how many hours have you done? How many of these have you done? And of course, we all know that you can have done a lot of hours, be absolutely useless. And I think what we've done, so what we've done, I think the trend in most professional bodies, especially in the UK, is to move to competence rather than counting these sorts of things. So, and it's exactly as Andrew says, it's we need to know that you've acquired the knowledge, and then a competence assessment is a method of understanding how you successfully applied that knowledge, and of course the right behaviours as well, because the ethical part's important, to create value for your client or customer. So I think that's a very good move to move to competence. Of course, that starts unlocking different routes in for people, because how you generate that knowledge, and how you get your experience can be done in a multiplicity of ways. So I think that general move is to be applauded, and should, if we think about this as a broader value chain, as I described earlier, should make a contribution to easing entries into this part of the profession. The same on CPD. We've moved away from numbers, you've got to do hours or days or something like that, to a plan, do, check, act approach, where you still have to submit your plan, but you need to plan it. You know, what does your customer need? What have you learned? What's on your professional development plan? And show that you're actually doing that. And of course, there will always be some mandated training when something significant changes across the board. So, you know, a major standard change or something like that. So I think, yeah, and all of this starts pointing towards professionalism, doesn't it? Because instead of treating people like a number to be counted, you're saying, okay, you've got to demonstrate competence. You've got to take personal responsibility for your CPD. And I think that's again where the professional body comes in to play, because of course the link with the employer, the link with other professionals to start developing bodies of knowledge, is that there's a rich vein of resources there through special interest groups and that sort of thing. I think we have to recognize that over the next decade or so, that the technology agenda, for example, is going to come and hit all auditors, whether in the financial or the quality or safety arena. So the knowledge, skills, behaviors are going to move potentially from, you know, going out and checking to understanding the systems that have been put in place to collect data. So so the CPD thing, I think, is going to be ever more important. It's not a one hit to qualify people.
Oh, fantastic talk about the difference between competence and hours of training, which is one of the core principles we are trying to change in our approach at GFSI. Recognizing that it's not because you've done a 3-day HACCP training that you necessarily know how to apply a HACCP in a factory or actually audit a HACCP. You have to demonstrate that through your skills and demonstrate the application of it. So thank you. I just want to say the questions are starting to flood in. Great. So don't hesitate. I will come to your questions very soon. So if you have questions in the audience, just send them through. I have seen them and I'm preparing to weave them in conversation. I just want to bounce back on something you said, Vince, and actually move to ask Leanne and Chris to intervene, because you said you're obviously here to verify competence and support the auditors, but actually it is very important that the whole system works together, and working in particular with your clients, inverted commas, or your stakeholders. And so in the safety auditing world, certification program owners and certification bodies are absolutely crucial. They are the center. And so for food safety auditors, they are very important stakeholders. And so Leanne, as SQF Vice President of Technical Affairs, in SQF, you are working with Exemplar Global on the qualification of US, you alluded to it. I just wanted you to share your experience of this system for your scheme, the benefit it has brought, why you decided to move to that model, and the learnings you gathered when you implemented that model.
Thanks, Marie-Claude. Thank you for inviting me to sit on this panel today. As Marie-Claude stated, SQF uses a similar approach as to what was proposed in the Race to the Top feature, and we do work with Exemplar Global to credential our auditors. What we found is that there's a set of criteria that is required for all auditors: HACCP training, minimum audit hours, education, experience, etc. And we were credentialing that on our own. Actually, we had a separate panel doing it for us on behalf of the CBs. We thought let us do this role first, and then we'll issue a credential, and then we'll allow this, and then the certification bodies conduct their own hiring practices. Then that's when they're checking to see whatever competencies they need, those soft skills that can't be checked perhaps in an application review. So rather than us doing this, what we needed was an independent assessment. And that's when we reached out to Exemplar Global. And we've been working with Exemplar Global for about 12 years now. And they're look at all of our auditors' applications and credentials. So they perform that role as an independent body, looking at an application against a set of criteria. And what, there's been bumps in the road, but we have one source now. So we have one point of contact. The auditors have one point of contact. CBs, CPOs have one point of contact. It allows us to establish specific KPIs that we can measure against holistically. So I'm not looking at, we have 36 CBs at SQF, and I'm not looking across 36 CBs for information. Rather, I go right to Exemplar Global for that information, and it provides us a point of measurement to identify anomalies or trends, areas that we need to improve on as it relates to the auditor credentialing process. And that just gives us that one point of contact. So for us, it's about the independency. There's no swaying one point from certification body. It creates consistency with us. And of course, that's how we use it as a CPO. So what's been proposed by GFSI, we're not still 100%. We're waiting for that second round of public consultation, and we're looking to see where those details are. That's in, from our perspective, what's missing from that document itself. But for us, and as a CPO, we believe that it's consistent. We're doing just the technical review, that hard review for the certification bodies, so that they can focus on looking at the soft skills, the details to the competencies, and their own hiring practices alone.
Thank you very much, Leanne. You just mentioned actually that, Exemplar Global in your case was doing the qualification of auditor body for yourself and for your 36 CV. So I'm going to turn to you, Chris, because you represent one of the 36 CVs. And I just wanted you to share your experience of working with that SQF model, and the values to you, but also what do you do when you know that an auditor is registered with Exemplar Global? What's left for you to do?
Absolutely. So like everybody else, thank you for having me on the call today. So appreciate it on that end. Just kind of echo with Leanne, I've actually probably entered into the SQF world back in 2009. So right about that time, I think Exemplar was really first getting rolled out. So it's really my exposure within the standard, and was the first GFSI standard that I was exposed to in this world at a different CV. And to echo sort of what Leanne was saying, there was no push for us to have to use auditors because of this credential being there. We still have to go through an interview process and ensure that they're following BV requirements or whichever CB that I'm working for. And then you're still required to be looking at that performance and competency through witness audits and whatnot. And that hasn't caused any issues on that end. The nice thing that we've run into with the SQFI side is if we have had challenges, I have had personally situations where certificates don't show up on a database. It's an easy one point of contact to get to confirm if the data is true and is accurate and the information is present on that side. It's easy to move to one location versus determining, is the information accurate or not that you're getting? Is it valid? And it's also allowed a very consistent playing field across all CBs on our side when we've been using this particular model on that end. Again, it's devil's in the details as we move through on this sort of side of things as to how the relationships are going to be between PRBs, CBs, CPOs, and whatnot. But the model that we've had, that I've been using with SQF for the past 12 years and change, it has been rather consistent on that side and easy to use. We know who we need to talk to at that particular PRB with Exemplar and his team, who have been fantastic to deal with. And we have consistency across the board. It seems the auditors are well aware of what they need to do and what they need to provide. There's not this guessing of which group we need to have to what. And again, you are going to have variations between CPOs. I can only state what we've used for SQFI and the SQFI auditing program on that end, but every auditor, they're pretty clear with what they need to provide at the initial application and then at the annual re-registration. And within the model that we have here in North America, which I know is somewhat of a model in other areas in the globe, we have a lot of subcontracted auditors that don't work for one particular auditing group. And that consistency and that one time of having to do things eases the pain of bringing people on and allowed us to focus on the interviews, the witness audits, and that true item of competency, which Vincent and Andrew have been talking about, which is obviously a driver. It's great that we do have the certificates, but do they know what they're doing? And that's allowed us to share the ability and our resources in that versus kind of just ticking boxes that sometimes it's been shared across other resources and eliminating that duplication of effort.
Great, thank you, Chris. I've got some questions that came through actually that I think fits right, so I'm going to ask it to you. So essentially, Exemplar Global just verifies the auditor competence for you, at least on the common competence that SQF has set as requirements for their scheme. You then have access to that records and you can ask Exemplar Global if you have doubts or challenges. Can you also raise your concerns if through your own checks you find issues with the competence of the auditor? So if, for example, you do a witness audit and the outcome of the witness audit shows that the auditor needs to develop certain skills, do you have the opportunity to then feed back to Exemplar Global and say, you know, this is a registered auditor with you, you ought to know about this and maybe support them?
Actually, he'll go right to the CPO, me. If you had that question, I don't know who that question was to, but there's been instances.
Go for it.
Chris and I have had conversations regarding an auditor that has been credentialed, which lets us go back and check the application with Exemplar Global. So yes, there have been instances, and then those are lessons learned, you know, so there might be a point of the review process where we would go back then to Exemplar Global and say, listen, we need to refine this process simply because there's the way that the review has been conducted, you know, we need to evaluate it a different way, but that is based off of communication. So the CB typically goes to the CPO, myself, and then we'll take it up with Exemplar Global, because what we want is a consistent process across all auditors, not per specific CB. So for us, it's important that we get those lessons learned and drive it up to Exemplar Global so it can be consistently improved across the process. Sorry, feel free to speak up, but I was like, no, there's specific examples. Chris is not sure.
Yep. I can echo that just quickly on what Leanne's saying. Is we have run into this in the past, and it is that relationship and that handoff in between groups has occurred where we have been able to communicate concerns that we've had. There's been an evolution in using this system and using Exemplar Global, and probably a great example is through the sponsorship that a CB is required to do now, and the clarification of what that sponsorship means and what is required from the CB side if you're sponsoring. So there may be a little bit more requirements on your side that way that you're doing it, but that's been clear and understood across all parties within the SQFI network. But yeah, I could tell you it's been pretty easy to communicate concerns with either competency, performance, or credentialing to move through that CPO, and then knowing that things are going to be coming back from Andrew's group at Exemplar.
Thank you both. Brilliant illustration of how the CPO, the professional body, and the CB can work together to make sure that we have competent auditors on the ground. So there's quite a lot of questions actually now. I'm literally flooded. I'm going to try and address a few which are specific around GFSI requirements on auditor. What does it take to become one? Why did I say that we were closing doors by increasing our requirements? So to set the situation, the current situation, today GFSI has quite a few requirements on auditors that we ask every GFSI recognized CPOs to translate into their scheme rules. And that includes in specific experience, specific education, specific asset training, and then a minimum number of practice in terms of food safety audits to the specific program that they are registered with. So the GFSI requirements are actually quite demanding, and they trickle into the rules of all 12 scheme owners who today are recognized by GFSI, and then those 12 CPOs set those rules for all their certification bodies. Since by the time these requirements reach the auditor, as an auditor, you may be asked to. Sorry, just hold on. You may be asked to. It's okay. No problem. We're having an intervention live here. No problem. As an auditor, you may be asked to apply the IFS rules, but if you want to become a BRC auditors, the rules will be slightly different, but they will stem for a lot of them from the same GFSI requirements. And so to improve the consistency, but also to these situations where as an auditor, you may be asked to provide your asset training 5 times in your lifetime, we are asking the professional body to do this for our community on those core competences that we've identified in our new requirements that are common to any auditors. In fact, regardless of whether you are auditing for a GFSI recognized program or non-GFSI recognized program. So that's the model. So it's really about getting support, clarity on competency, harmonization, but also mutualizing the efforts. So that one point of contact as an auditor, registered to a professional body, who will be able to demonstrate to your different employers that you have the competence to become a food safety auditor. And they will also be able to advise if you have gaps, if you do not have all the competence to become a food safety auditor. So that's essentially, hopefully, answers some of the questions that came through. There were questions about the number of certified auditors out there. Andrew gave some numbers. I don't have a globe, but I can tell you that we estimated the number of auditors who work for GFSI recognized program to around 8,000. And we know it's not enough, actually, and that's the main issue. The important factor is not how many auditors are out there. The important factor is we don't have enough auditors to sustain the increasing demand in third-party certification that organizations like GFSI are driving, actually. And so this is what we collectively need to work on. Quick questions to everybody. So we talked a lot about competence. We talked a lot about the service given to the CBE and to the CPO by the professional bodies. If I'm an auditor right now, I think this is going to make my life a little bit complicated. I'm going to be asked a lot of questions. So really, how things are going to change from, demonstrating your competence or your CV to your CB to actually working with the professional bodies. Is anybody ready to maybe discuss the value for food safety auditors of being a member of a professional body? And I'll call out for volunteers. If there's no volunteers, I'll just name one of you to answer.
Well, I'm happy to have a start on it, Marie-Claude. One of the points that Leanne made earlier on was the ability to have some oversight of a bigger group, some consistency across the bigger group. And I really do think one of the opportunities for us here through this initiative is to collaborate to put together some big data sets that we can then agree what we want them to look like. So we want, you know, if we want to shape this body of auditors to be something, then we can work together to do it for the whole, and agree what's required to do that. So rather than this becoming a prohibitive thing, it becomes a collaborative thing that we can develop the skill sets. You know, I certainly know from my previous life in a certification body that specialised in food safety, I think we ran 4 or perhaps 5 of the GFSI schemes, and we had auditors that had to be approved in each one of them. The level of compatibility was considerable. The high degree of similarity, but minor differences. And it was about focusing on those similarities that was really important. But I'm going to come back to the point of assessment of competency, and it's a notoriously difficult thing to do, because the very act of looking at somebody doing something, witnessing them, changes the behaviour. And in fact, some of the accreditation bodies locally are changing their approach to witness auditing because of that very thing. So how do we, on an ongoing basis, assess the competence? And I think that's something we could well discuss through this next period of time, and agree on some ways that could be done. I'm a believer that those that know best the competence are those that engage them as the CBs, as the scheme owners, even as the auditees that are the recipients of the auditing. And how might we tap into all of that see the performance on a day-to-day basis, not just on that once every year, 2 years, 3 years, in an artificial environment of a witness assessment. So working together to look at where we sit, define where we want to be, and then agree some methodologies around the assessment of competence as we move from one place to another. I think it's an opportunity that we have here. And as a former auditor myself, I would have found that very helpful to be able to plot that pathway from how do I get from here to where I need to be.
I just want to build off of what Andrew said, because I believe in that process. I think that's an amazing approach, because not all auditors are the same. And right now we currently treat all auditors the same, regardless of their level of experience or expertise in different industry scopes or with different CPOs. So creating a risk-based approach to credentialing and identifying those professional development needs for auditors based off of their unique skill set would be advantageous for us moving forward, because right now it's one size fits all, and it's one size fits all for auditors, and this approach now is all one size fits all for CPOs. There needs to be discussion and flexibility so that we're hearing from all stakeholders groups, CPOs, CBs, auditors, and the PRBs, so that we can design a credentialing process that's going to fit for in the end for that auditor. And that's I think, building off of what Andrew says, using all the data points that we have from all the different CPOs where those areas of opportunity are, we can certainly create credentialing process and a professional development process moving forward.
I'll be happy to follow the flow from that we have here on that side. I think, Andrew, you brought up a really good point that we haven't really touched on, is talking about ABs and looking at things in the AB acceptance level on this front. So I know I didn't really mention that in what I was previously saying. We do work with a number of ABs within the SQFI program, and Leanne can echo this as well. And we haven't had too many challenges with it on that front with the method that's in place for SQFI at this point. And I personally have, being at different CBs in my career and 2 different ABs that I've had to deal with, it's been a pretty consistent and harmonized approach. Now, the reason I bring that up is, again, devil's in the details of how we're going to be doing things. Where does the level of CPO engagement, where does the level of AB acceptance come into everything? But for auditors, it is very attractive to have one spot to go to do everything. If you are a subcontracted model, or as Andrew brought up, you are an auditor that is auditing across multiple standards, even within one organization, it saves a lot of time of having to duplicate potential efforts that you've already done. That time as a potential subcontractor, or even as an auditor, can be used for professional development in lieu of filling out applications and whatnot. It can be used to furthering your audit careers, having more audits on your calendar, whatnot. Vince, you brought up about a plan, do, check, act model. You know, you're able to then dedicate some time there to plan out that professional development on that side if it's moved that way. Now, that is something that we've experienced in the SQFI program that's made life a little bit easier on that end. Especially if there's the engagement on the CPO side, we don't have to have that duplication between each single CB, which seems to occur. And it's, why did I need to do this? And why do I need to have that sort of update again when I've done it at this CB? That might be something that can be done. I don't think it's going to absolve every single certification body from having their own internal training, their own internal competency assessments, but I do think it's going to allow for a bit more consistency in that elimination of potential redundant efforts that have occurred, which will make it more attractive to those auditors. And again, the devil's always in the details. There's always little things like, what will the eventual cost be? Who's going to burden the cost on that front? What is the level of rigor that's going to be in place for one CPO program versus another when it cascades down from that PRB? What'll happen with the different PRBs that are being used? Because right now the model that we have with SQFI is we're single source. That's easy. This model isn't necessarily the exact same. So what's going to happen when more PRBs get into the fold? Where is that going to go? What's the challenges that way? But it's still definitely an attractive area where we're going to be looking at things.
Thank you, Chris. And I'm going to bounce off your last comment straight, because as a few people have asked actually questions around, will there be one PRB, many PRB that will work? So just to clarify, the model that GFSI is suggesting is that there will be several PRBs and a system of oversight by GFSI to ensure that all the GFSI recognized PRBs satisfy the requirements set in the benchmarking requirements. So very similar model to the current CPO recognition system, with the same mindset of the one certified, accepted everywhere. So the idea is that the auditors will be registering to one of the GFSI recognized professional bodies. They can choose the one that is in their region or has a program they feel is accessible to them based on their history and their experience so far. And then they don't register to any other PRB. So the harmonization piece really relies on us at GFSI to ensure that our requirements address this issue and that we have a strong oversight to enforce those requirements. So that applies to your comment, Chris, and also a few questions that came through. I also feel that I have to clarify that Vincent and Andrew kindly agreed to join this webinar, but they are not necessarily the future GFSI recognized PRBs. They accepted to come and share their experience as existing professional bodies who could explain to us in their own word what it means to move to a competency-based model and supporting professionals through their competence development and their CPD. So that's something that came through a few times in the questions. There was something else that I wanted to mention that came across. An important question that was asked is that the GFSI recognized professional recognition bodies focus and will focus on the core common competencies to all food safety auditors. And so it is expected that the scheme owners will have specific requirements around the content of their standards. And as you said, Chris, yourself, each CB will have their own systems that the auditor will need to learn to use when they work for you. And all of this essentially illustrates that we're not talking about individual organizations working inside or next to each other. We are talking about a true interdependent ecosystem who needs to collaborate around supporting food safety auditors being the best of themselves every day when they audit. And so this is also a very important aspect that came through in the questions. So I want to run through a few more of these questions, loads of them. I'm afraid I won't be able to ask all of them to our panelists today, but we'll make sure that we keep records of those and address them in the summary we will publish with the recording of that webinar. So the current auditors, somebody asked, I guess probably an auditor, okay, clear on what the model will be. So auditors will be expected to register to professional bodies and get certified through them. What about the auditors are currently auditing and are, for all intents and purposes, already licensed to audit? So this is very important. As I mentioned, probably about 8,000 of you out there already working hard for our scheme owners and the certification bodies. We haven't forgotten you. And so in the forthcoming consultation, which Leanne said she couldn't wait to see open, we will be talking and engaging around the transitional arrangements, because we realize the model we are suggesting is obviously significantly different to the model broadly used. I think SQF, you are actually an exception in our world with example global. And so we have to make sure the transition is successful to everybody, and most crucial to the food safety auditors out there who are doing a sterling job for all of us. And so this is something that we haven't defined yet, but we are committed to facilitate for people who are already in the profession. There was also a nice comment around the fact that it would be nice to be recognized as a food safety professional and for their competence. I think that was another comment from an auditor who feels they've had years of auditing and still feel sometimes they're not being respected and recognized for the value they bring, which is at the same time heartbreaking and encouraging in terms of really establishing that recognized profession. So let me see. There was a question about sectors, so we might try to address this because I think it will lead to an interesting conversation as a last question. So somebody mentioned that ISO 22003 defines scopes of industry, but in actual fact, in the GFSI world and in the food safety certification world in general, there are many different definitions of industry sectors, yet this is three critical parameters to an auditor profile. So we foresee managing this question of auditor certification and recognizing clearly the industry sector experience. Anybody wants to try and have a stab at this?
I guess I could try to speak for it. I guess using the SQF model is probably a good way to look at it. It is the CPO for us, the ease on our end was the clarity of the process, knowing the requirements for each of the different categories in which one applies for, and knowing what those requirements are that are within there. And I guess I'm a bit confused with how I understand the ISO sort of framework, but I think this is where the CPO is going to have to step up as to what their expectations are within those particular sectors. And there may be, I think, maybe a level of confusion of where the responsibility may blur here on those ends. Because I think what and if I'm wrong, correct me, but the PRBs that we're talking about here are going to be doing the basic level, not the category approval, right? We're not at that level yet. So we're talking about the basic on that side. And I think that that's where the great relationship that we've had with SQFI and Exemplar Global so far has made it easy for us to know what those experiences are and what's needed. And as there has been an evolution into those separate category sectors, you've had additional requirements being put on based on either what's been seen in the industry or based on GFSI benchmarking requirements. So be it for SQFI, I guess the two best examples I could probably spit out off the top of my head right now are for category 15, which is canned goods. We have to have better processing control school when you apply through. So we know that that's something else additional that's within there. If you're doing packaging, we know we have to have the packaging course that's within there that's recognized. So I think that that's going to be where it's going to be defined, and it's going to be up to the CPO, and why it's going to be very important, the engagement of the CPO for this system to work, for this system to move forward. Because if we don't have that, that question is going to blur and be very, very confusing.
If I could offer a comment here too, look, this is particularly important in the food safety sector, where you're dealing with the high risk areas. Particularly, there are a lot of areas of lower risk that some commonality of skill sets are going to be absolutely fine. Perhaps things like transport logistics, but other things like heat treatment and canning, high risk, and we need to be able to identify where those skill sets are set. From our point of view, we're the servants of the scheme owners to this, plus the standards that are going to prevail, like 22,003 and so on. But the other dimension of this is that even when a particular auditor is credentialed, it's incumbent on the user of them, the certification body, to apply the right auditor to the right situation. And that's something that we don't get to see, but the accreditation bodies may do, and indeed the scheme owners may well do as well. But you want to be applying the right auditor with the right skills to the right operation. Or once again, they might be competent here, but you put them in a situation where they're not suited or skilled or qualified, then you risk them being more damaged than good through being incompetent.
Fantastic, thank you both. Very clear. So essentially, the professional body is here to confirm the competence an auditor has. The CB is here to ensure that the right auditor is allocated to the right audit based on their competence and the need of the audits, really. And essentially that's the model. One thing I would add is that the professional body is also here to access and signpost the auditors who want to develop their competence towards training organizations or experts who can help them gain those competencies. So it's time saved for the scheme owners and the CBs because they provide that service basically, and it's actually a big part of your job to develop that network of training organizations and access to webinars like the one today to your professionals. So that's an important service, really. We've got 1 minute left, so I'm going to conclude and make sure that we finish on time by saying, essentially, as Leanne mentioned, we did do a consultation on the proposed benchmarking requirements over the summer, and I'm overdue to send a reply of that consultation. We will be publishing the response to that consultation in the coming 2 weeks. To-do list. That's the only block, essentially. It was a very, very good and well-responded consultation. We will be opening a second consultation before the end of the month on the transition arrangements. So asking questions around, okay, what's the best way of dealing with the current auditors who are working and for all intents and purposes have been considered as competent, and how do we help them get into the new registrar? How long do we take to do this, and when do we make the new model compulsory? And we will be publishing the actual final requirements in October. So you will be able to see what the GFSI requirements are on professional bodies. It has been a collective exercise, and you will see in the requirement that there is a need for the professional bodies to be open to feedback from the CBs and the scheme owners on their auditors, but also on their criteria to verify competence. Because as we mentioned throughout this webinar, it's a collaborative exercise of an interdependent ecosystem. With this, thank everybody for joining today. Wish you a good day, a good evening, or a good night in some cases, and reiterate that the recording of that webinar will be available on our website together with a summary of our conversation and answer to some of the questions that I couldn't get to ask today because of time, as usual. Thank you very much to you, Leanne, Vincent, Chris, and Andrew, for your insight and open and honest answers to my questions. I wish you all a good day too. Goodbye, everybody.